On September 1st, at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and Narendra Modi held talks and introduced a shared diplomatic term, multipolarity over hegemony. Security without bloc logic and free supply chains without politicization. And behind this showcase, pragmatism can be read. This means increasing settlements in national currencies, considering a Shanghai Cooperation Organization bank as protection from Western sanctions, and agreeing on a negotiation framework for Ukraine. Yes, today we heard from dictator Putin as he claimed that it was not Russia that allegedly started the war against Ukraine, that NATO should not expand, and that the war in Ukraine should only be ended by eliminating its root causes. We heard Narendra Modi urging Putin to end the conflict, and so on. But I suggest not clinging to all these loud quotes. You've already seen and read them in Telegram channels. I suggest we analyze what stands behind all this, what it means for Ukraine and the West. In short, Beijing and Moscow are synchronizing their ways of bypassing sanctions and their rhetoric. India is maintaining a double track, buying Russian oil while at the same time talking to the West. I'm Alexei Pecci. Today is September 1st. Let's analyze together the results of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit based on the statements that have already been made. But before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, write any comment, and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel, Pecci News. The link is in this video's description. So, at the opening of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, Xi Jinping sounded like the architect of a new system. And next, I'll quote him. We accept bullying logic. No country, regardless of size, can dictate others' development models. The worst mistakes of the 20th century grew out of a belief in exceptionalism and bloc thinking. We do not believe in a new Cold War. We believe in the infrastructure of peace, free trade, settlements in national currencies, and secure supply chains. If you ask what the world needs, the answer is simple. Fewer sanctions, more trust. Basically, it sounds like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization countries should unite to fight against Western sanctions. And this is not just a nice paragraph. It's an instruction for banks and corporations on how to live in the era of what they call politicized logistics. Xi Jinping has made it clear who currently leads the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And this is where Trump should respond toughly, but so far we only see some loud statements from him, which he himself later cancels. Putin delivered a reprise of his usual theme, quote, "We can and should talk about peace in Ukraine, but not without recognizing the mistakes of the West, first and foremost the expansion of NATO and the destruction of strategic stability in Europe. Talks will stay just talks. Russia is open to dialogue, but it's not an ultimatum," says Putin. This quote shows both cynicism and going along with Xi Jinping. On one hand, how can this dictator Putin even talk about ultimatums when he himself is the one making them? Putin echoes Xi Jinping's words that the West should admit its mistakes and supposedly accept the New World Order, where the Shanghai Cooperation Organization plays a leading role. It sounds fantastic, and I'll remind you that the United States has already made it clear that it won't tolerate it if Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa countries try to abandon the dollar in their transactions. Well, the same applies to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. But the logic of dictators is clear. They are looking for some workarounds to evade sanctions. At the Randramot, the Prime Minister of India took a very precise middle path and stated, "Our region has lived with other people's conflicts for too long. India believes in partnership, not rivalry, in development, not dividing lines. Terrorism and its financing are unacceptable everywhere. We expect everyone to act responsibly." Well, Indian media have already translated this point, saying that Delhi is not breaking ties with anyone, which means it keeps its leverage at every table. From oil to Russian oil to Western technologies. Now let's analyze all of this. The first layer is financial and logistical. China is creating parallel channels for settlements in national currencies like yuan and rupees, not in Russian rubles. Cross-border interbank payment system expanding as a society for worldwide interbank financial telecommunication alternative, talks on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Bank, and unified insurance rules within the group. This is exactly where the West has leverage, insurance, ports, repair docks, and so on. So, Xi Jinping is basically suggesting trying to get away from Western sanctions and finally tie Russia and India, as well as the other Shanghai Cooperation Organization members, to himself. Russia, squeezed by restrictions on the so-called shadow fleet, declining insurance availability, and the price cap on Russian oil, objectively needs this kind of new cushion. That's why Xi Jinping's statement about protecting supply chains from arbitrary restrictions sounds the way it does. It's as if this statement was written for companies that work with the Russian Federation and are afraid of falling under secondary Western sanctions. But objectively, for now, no one in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization really understands how all of this is supposed to work. Well, and as an example, while Xi Jinping was speaking, the Chinese Haihe Rural Commercial Bank, which fell under European Union sanctions, stopped accepting payments from Russia today. This bank was among the last Chinese banks willing to open correspondent accounts for Russian credit institutions that were not under sanctions. And on July 19, the Council of the European Union imposed sanctions against Haihe for allegedly providing services related to cryptocurrencies, which significantly undermine the purpose of anti-Russian restrictions. This decision came into effect on August 9, and from that moment, European Union citizens are prohibited from participating in any transactions with the Chinese bank. Now, these Chinese banks face a typical choice. Either follow the calls of Xi Jinping and lose ties with the West forever, or ignore Xi Jinping and keep their Western business. The second layer is political and rhetorical. Moscow is trying to ensure that any discussion about peace in Ukraine starts not with ending the Russian occupation, but with what they call security reform in Europe. In other words, with the West admitting its guilt for something. That's the meaning behind Putin's phrase, so to speak. Quote, "Discussing lasting peace is pointless without admitting mistakes." This message suggests NATO should meet all Kremlin demands and then Russia will supposedly end the war. Well, that's just dust. Putin wants to show he has allies and isn't concerned about Western threats. The third layer is the Indian balance. New Delhi uses the discount on Russian oil as an argument in negotiations with the United States on tariffs and technology. And the tense sections of the border with China serve as a reminder to Beijing that special relations are by no means equal to subordination. At render mode, he emphasized to Xi Jinping that Putin is subordinate to him, his servant or slave. However, New Delhi seeks special relations, not subordination. Yes, we have seen how China and India are getting closer now, making loud statements, resuming flights, and so on. But in reality, India also knows that falling into complete subordination to China is dangerous. That's why we'll see many more balancing actions from Modi. And yes, hugging Putin is also a demonstration from Narendra Modi to the West, showing that he supposedly has an alternative. What is there to choose? The consequences for Ukraine from such a rapprochement between China, Russia, and India also need to be discussed. Here, it's important to track actions, not words. The more real alternatives there are to Western payment and insurance infrastructure, the longer the Kremlin can hold out. The antidote is clear. Close sanctions, loopholes with regulations and technical measures, not just words. Port bans on docking and repairing tankers from the shadow fleet. Insurance filters, that is, no ships connected to Russians should be insured at all. Stopping the schemes of mixing this oil in third countries. Audit of financial bridges. These are exactly the nuts and bolts, so to speak, that nullify all the pomp of multipolarity when it comes to accounting. Because you can loudly declare multipolarity, but if one of the poles, namely the West, is close to you, then you are forced to play only on one side. And here I'll give you a direct quote from a behind-the-scenes conversation with a high-ranking Eastern European official who summed up this mood in Europe like this: "We are taught not to dramatize." Alright, then we will simply quietly turn off the switches in insurance, in repairs, in ports, and so on. No drama, but with results. As for India, I'll add one more thing. In rendered mode, the words are chosen carefully, but you can't hide the economy. It's profitable for Indian oil refineries to process Russian oil, mix it with other types, and re-export it. Stricter European control over origin, insurance, and fleet leasing increases the cost of all bypass routes. This is by no means hostility toward New Delhi, it's just market hygiene. And the line for Kiev and Washington here is simple. Don't ask India for the impossible, don't make loud statements about sanctions, and don't demand anything. just reduce the profitability of gray schemes so much that cheap Russian oil simply stops bringing in super profits, and then India will give up this oil on its own. So in conclusion, I'll say that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has shown a toothy showcase and a cautious blueprint called a world without Western dictate. In reality, a world without Western influence involves insurance, port control, trade, settlements, and more. If you don't have Western insurance, if you don't have access to the docks, then your tanker, no matter what you call it, will remain empty. That's all. For Ukraine, the key point is that the world isn't shaped just by quotes from Putin, Xi Jinping, Modi, or Trump. It doesn't matter who's or if it's about tables and data. And these tables, the West can rewrite much faster than they can manage to build some kind of Shanghai Cooperation Organization bank. Clear preventive measures are needed during the strike, so that while they're just considering action, the West has already stopped them. That's why. So, these are the conclusions I drew from this summit. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.